So once again, a very warm welcome to all our guests joining from all around the world. Hi, Dr. Vinod Kumar from Symbiosis Institute of Business Management, Pune, and Dr. Anabel Gutierrez from University of London feel honored and privileged to moderate the third seminar in the third edition of the seminar series on the digital future for business and society, emerging perspective on metaverse. This series is jointly hosted by Professor Yogesh Kumar Dwivedi, who is Professor of Digital Marketing and Innovation and Founding Director of Digital Future for Sustainable Business and Society Research Group at School of Management, Swansea University, Wales, UK. Next, we have Dr. Laurie Hughes. He is Senior Lecturer within Strategic Operation Group and founding member of Digital Future for Sustainable Business and Society Research Group at School of Management, Swansea University, Wales, UK. We also have with us Professor Raman. He is currently Director, Symbiosis Institute of Business Management, Pune, Dean, Faculty of Management, Symbiosis International Team University, Director, Strategy and Development, Symbiosis Group. Our entire series is jointly supported by Digital Marketing and Analytics, SIG Academy of Marketing, Grenoble IAE Graduate School of Management, a Grenoble INP School of University of Grenoble Alps, the e-business and e-government SIG British Academy of Management, the UK Academy for Information Systems UKAIS. To tell you something very briefly about the seminar series, emerging technologies such as AI, blockchain, Internet of Things, and the Metaverse undoubtedly offer transformative potential for augmentation and potential replacement of human performed tasks and activities within a wide range of industrial, intellectual, and social applications. The impact and widespread adoption of these technologies is likely to be transformational within sectors ranging from agriculture, finance, healthcare, manufacturing, retail, supply chain, logistics, and utilities. The seminar series on the digital future for business and society, emerging perspective on the metaverse, will present various perspectives from a number of leading expert speakers to highlight the opportunities and challenges posed by rapid emergence of the metaverse. The seminar series will not only offer a timely and thought-provoking insight into the metaverse, but also its impact on the future of business management and societal factors impacted by growth, direction, and widespread adoption of these new immersive technologies. So today we have with us two eminent thought leaders, Professor Andres Gustafsson and Mr. Jared Lartey from BI Norwegian Business School, Norway. Today they'll share their thoughts on the topic Metaverse, on human aspect, privacy, and value destruction. To tell you something about our speakers, Professor Andres Gustafsson is Professor of Marketing at BI Norwegian Business School. He is Distinguished Professorial Fellow at University of Manchester's Alliance, Manchester's Business School. Dr. Gustafsson is conducting his research on customer satisfaction and loyalty, management of consumer relationships, and consumer behavior. His research work is published in journals such as Journal of Marketing, Journal of Marketing Research, and Journal of Consumer Research. His research has traditionally been carried out in close collaboration with companies like IKEA, Telia, and ICA. He is former editor-in-chief of Journal of Business Research. He was the first international president for American Marketing Association's Academic Council, and he is also a recipient of Christopher Lovelock Career Contribution to the Service Discipline Award. Recently, he has joined the Shade Foundation and American Marketing Association as member of board. Speaking about our next speaker, Mr. Jared Lartey, he is doctoral candidate at BI Norwegian Business School. His research interests focus on exploring technological practices through the lens of consumer culture as well as topics related to privacy in smart services, consumer object experiences, and well-being. So welcome both of you. Without any further ado, I'd like to call our speakers of the day, Professor Andres Gustafsson and Jared Lartey, to take over and address our audience. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much. We will mix and match somewhat in terms of who speaks. So we're not gonna have a certain order of sort of things. I like Jared to interfere, and I'm gonna certainly interfere with what he's saying. But anyway, what our goal is to sort of look in terms of the probably a bit darker side of metaverse. We hear a lot about the promise of metaverse, and of course it is a fantastic prospect if it's implemented well. But we also think that it makes a lot of sense to think about what can go wrong, because things will go wrong. I mean, if we don't think that, I mean, we should look at what's happening on social media at the moment. So we think we should try to think about aspects that potentially could be corrected initially if we design things well. In line of this, we will think about or talk about paradoxes, because we do believe that the new technology has really nice promises of the future, can deliver really good value. But at the same time, it can also cause some destruction. And for instance, just to give you, we will sort of touch on this more, of course, but you know, in one way, it's inclusive. It's lets everyone that wants to participate, they can participate. But in the other way, you also have lockout effects. If you don't have access to Metaverse, if you don't subscribe to whatever they're offering, you actually miss out on things that could be potentially important. But we will talk more about that. I was just sort of teasing you a bit in terms of what type of paradoxes we will be talking about.
And finally, contrary to gap spotting, we would attempt to look into some or highlight some critical and interesting questions that we think we should look ahead to when we have discussions around the metaverse.
If we sort of look back on what's been researched in terms of online, what people do online, it's been to a very large degree connected to utilitarian values. We want to do certain work, carry out certain tasks, search for the best product, buy whatever we need here and now. So we're sort of performing some sort of work when we do go online, and this has been validated by companies. But we're thinking that Metaverse can actually help out in terms of becoming more hedonistic and solve some of the social values. You know, instead of you shopping alone, you could go and shop with your friends and family potentially using Metaverse. So we think that instead of just focusing on the utilitarian sort of efficiency aspects, the hedonic values may sort of be highlighted more. And this doesn't rule out that we can actually use Metaverse to become more efficient and maybe set out our second person and, you know, our avatar to do some shopping for us while we're doing something else. So it may not be just totally hedonic, but we think that thought it's probably more highlighted.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of the promises around the future of the metaverse, we also expect that the metaverse, aside from making us very efficient, should help us solve some pressing global challenges that we have today. Speak of challenges with regards to access to information, access to good and quality healthcare, education, inclusion, sustainability, among others. And for example, as a promising future, we see that such a universe or such a platform could, for instance, help us minimize the negative impact of our travels on the environment. Aside from this, we also could envision the metaverse as a potential platform or universe to shape our well-being. For example, making us better off, creating value for us as individuals and consumers. But interestingly, one of the questions that we often need to ask ourselves around the metaverse, we think should focus on, are we excluding people, and do ironically excluded people kind of want to be part of this anyway? If we look at platforms that we've had in the past and compare that to the metaverse today, we often realize that often vulnerable people, for example, people who are very young or older people, end up getting excluded around this. So we think these are also very important questions that we should be asking with regards to the promising future of the metaverse. Anders, maybe you want to talk about democracy and governance?
Yeah, this is something that we are a bit concerned about. Maybe we think that this is too important to sort of leave to private companies to actually do for us. Maybe sort of they give leeway to sort of highlight some certain individuals if they pay more. So we do have some issues thinking that we may set aside some democracy issues or governance issues if we give too much power to private companies in this.
So speaking of the promising future of the metaverse, perhaps we should also talk about value and value creation and co-creation within the metaverse, as well as the potential of the metaverse in actually possibly destroying value. So we had this recent paper with Yogesh, Professor Yogesh and other colleagues, where we talk about making the metaverse matter by creating value and making us better off in terms of well-being. And we think the metaverse could actually help us create the value that we want.
Yeah, I think this sort of value issues is quite important. Instead of just thinking of value in terms of price versus quality, we do believe that you should highlight sort of the well-being, that should be in focus rather than the monetary issues. So we really want to stress that, and of course. We do sort of going back to what I said about private companies. We are worried about sort of who owns the data, who will sort of have control over the information, and what happens with that information, and also make sure that companies don't sort of steer us towards bad choices. That is a potential problem.
Yeah. And speaking of value creation and value co-creation, we really think that the characteristics of the metaverse, as has been pronounced, for example, its immersiveness, its sociality, and its ability to help us build limitless tools can actually help us improve various aspects of the value creation spheres for augmented and virtual experiences. For example, companies through the metaverse would have a better potential to create value by allowing customers to access tools that could help them pursue better self-services. And also on the idea of value creation and co-creation, and also value destruction, I think most often we've heard people talk about the potential of the metaverse and probably less of value destruction. But to touch on the idea of value destruction, we really reason that privacy could actually play a very important role here. Often privacy concerns about brands that actually man the metaverse could lead to this. If we look at what we've actually had in the past, for example, criticisms about the company or the brand Meta itself and its involvement, for example, in kind of mishandling consumer data and all that, these actually pitches very important concerns about privacy. If we also look at previous studies around privacy, we actually could find that when customers actually feel their privacy has been compromised in some way, they end up having these low perceptions about power and control over how their data is being used. And looking at this in the context of the metaverse, we really think this may actually lead customers to feeling predictable and vulnerable in the metaverse, especially when they feel their privacy is being compromised. A good example of this is probably an experiment that was actually done with some consumers, where they were asked to make some choices, and subsequently they were told that their choices were going to be predicted by AI. And for privacy's sake, what actually happened in the experiment was that these consumers began actually contradicting their own preferences to avoid being predicted and feeling that kind of vulnerability. So we really think that moving ahead, and in terms of creating value and preserving value from destruction, these privacy issues should actually be considered very importantly. Also on the role of privacy, I was recently speaking to a PhD colleague from Germany, and we had this discussion around people thinking of the metaverse beyond its potent ability to serve as another universe or an alternative platform to what we actually have now, to looking at the metaverse as probably an add-on, a voluntary add-on due to privacy concerns. Also, the privacy actually has an effect on how we think of the metaverse if we should look at it as multiple and seamless universes as the metaverse hype actually promises. And if we think of the metaverse as different universes actually seamlessly connected, then this idea of data portability is a very important issue here. And to get away with this, or to give consumers that assurance that their data could actually be transferred across multiple universes to give them the best experience as possible, we should find ways to ensure consumer privacy is actually being protected.
So what we are sort of going towards, and I sort of started off talking about this, is that we have developed some paradoxes that we will sort of cover a bit further. So I'm not going to mention all the paradoxes here because it's going to be very repetitive, but you can see that we have some paradoxes that we are sort of highlighting, and by paradox we mean that it could be potentially positive, but it also has negative aspects that we may need to consider. So let's get started.
Yes, we did reason around these paradoxes as one way the metaverse enabling our experiences, but on the other way, perhaps constraining us in some aspects of everyday life. And one way that we see this is the potential of customization versus exploitation. So of course, often when we join these kind of platforms, we do share a lot of information for customization, and this helps these platforms personalize our experiences, not just probably to the correct decisions, and also provide us that kind of convenience in enjoying that experience. And if we think of the metaverse as something that we would live in, as the metaverse hype actually projects, we can expect that service providers would collect a lot of information for us in order to customize these experiences for us. For example, what we look at in the metaverse, what we engage with, and the emotions that we show with various activities that we actually interact with in the metaverse. However, often we tend to think that the information that we share would be well protected or would be handled properly by these service providers. But on the contrary, we often do not know how these platforms use our information. And so there is this potential of exploitation.
Yeah, I think this is sort of, this really deserves to be highlighted, because we like things better when it's smooth and it's easy and it runs perfectly, and it does if we leave all the data traces. But at the same time, we are targets if we do all that.
The next paradox that we began actually reasoning around was with regards to accessibility and then exclusion. And I think this is a very important way to reason around the potential and also the constraints that the metaverse actually presents to us. So as we know, the metaverse have actually suggests that all experiences and services possibly around the globe are likely to be available to us to subscribe. And things that we actually do today in real life are likely to be mirrored and even done probably better within the metaverse. We would have better access to knowledge, services, travel, inclusion, democracy, among others. But the downside of this, perhaps, Anders, you want to talk about that with the exclusion?
Yeah, the downside is really that if you don't subscribe, you're left out. And we already see this, at least in our societies, where elderly people don't get access to some healthcare because they don't know how to sign on. Because they need a cell phone, they need a smartphone, they need to know how to do things. So banking is difficult today. Sort of assigning to healthcare is difficult today, and just imagine what it could be if it's sort of even more advanced, how difficult it potentially could be. So some people may be left out from really fantastic experiences, but probably more importantly, some really important services like healthcare. I mean, if you can go to the world expert, sort of the leading expert in the world, but you cannot because you don't have access to that subscription. So it's sort of, yes, you have access, but you can also be denied access, which is sort of making the world a bit worse off, I guess.
Yeah. And also on the issue of democracy versus power imbalance. Today, if we look at, for example, what happens with the existing platforms that we have, we tend to think that we do have a more amplified voice today, and everyone seems to have a presence in the marketplace. And as a potential of the metaverse, we actually expect that we probably would have a more amplified voice in such a platform. But then the question would be, how do users know whom to listen to and whom they can actually trust? And if we go back to these platforms that we already have existing today, we actually see that people with power, people with affluence and resources seem to dominate these platforms. And as a potential power imbalance, we can kind of expect that these same people would dominate what happens in the metaverse. The Mark Zuckerbergs of today, the Jeff Bezoses of today, these same people could actually dominate what actually happens in the metaverse, and that could create some kind of power imbalance. So a question that actually remains here around these paradoxes is that, can we really trust them if this really happens? And how do we know who and what to trust?
Yeah, we even now have a problem with fake news and unbiased information. If we use these technologies even more, it's not unlikely that it's going to get even worse.
And another interesting thing that I really found about this paradoxical nature of the metaverse was with one of its most pronounced characteristics, which has to do with immersion or immersiveness. So we think that on one side, the metaverse actually provides a very fantastic opportunity to actually immerse ourselves into experiences. But on the other side, we actually risk enslavement into such technological experiences. So today, for example, we could actually expect that based on what we use current existing platforms for, the metaverse would actually provide us opportunities for social, utilitarian, and hedonic experiences, from leisure activities to entertainment, among others. However, the paradox here, or the downside here, is that long-term immersion into such virtual worlds, if there are available technologies, could risk our enslavement to the metaverse. And this is actually already happening today. Most of us today cannot live so far from our phones. Most of us today cannot live so far from social media. And we think the immersive nature of the metaverse could even make this a more complicated issue.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, they designed technology because it's going to be user-friendly. We will want to use it. So, of course, there's limited... there's a limited push to make it less immersive, because it's the nature. We want, sort of in the nature of the technology, we want it to be immersive. We want to be wanting to use it, and it may entrap us.
Yeah, and speaking of entrapment, we are likely to fall into this victims to being or moving from, in quote, free men to kind of actors in a nudged, program and simulated world. And what we actually see here as something we should reason about ahead with the metaverse is that we should look at architecting the metaverse to actually enhance or enshrine our autonomy, our sense of free will, and our sense of freedom to serve us better as humans. We also thought around the paradoxical nature of the metaverse, from the metaverse helping us to create and extend reality, which we think it does extremely well, versus disconnecting us from reality and nature. So the possibility that the metaverse could actually help us extend our current reality or even augment our reality is very exciting. We can expect to go on leisure activities, exercise, probably go fishing, teach, access health services within the metaverse. We can also expect new forms of consumption. For example, if you look at what is happening in Roblox today, popular Spanish brand Balenciaga has actually partnered with Roblox to allow members of this platform to use their favorite apparels. So we can actually expect that the metaverse could help us extend reality by creating new forms of consumption, creating new virtual resources to help us become more sustainable, interacting with objects, people, and experiences in very multi-sensory dimensions. However, the problem with this, we think, is that we as humans always depend on nature. And potentially the metaverse with all its elusive realities may potentially disconnect us from very important aspects of nature.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, we have evolved to use our senses. It's sort of, if you look at how sort of the highways to our senses are connected to our primal brain, which is pretty much controlling us. We learn, our experiences are created by using our senses. Now we go into another world to use our senses, and we don't know what we're doing really. And the other thing is, frankly, research has shown that we have actually become more stupid, not smarter, and that's because we have a highly the world is very sort of controlled in various ways, what we can and cannot do. We don't solve problems the way we used to, and I wonder what happens if we live our lives in a virtual reality, which is pretty much, we cannot hurt ourselves. Maybe we can lose money, but we won't be having any bone fractures and stuff like that out there. That's my guess, at least, but who knows?
Yeah, and like it or not, we seem to be programmed to depend largely on nature.
Yeah, we are.
We also thought around the potential of the metaverse. I think this, for me, is very interesting. The potential of the metaverse to actually extend, reinforce, and reprogram our current identities, versus a downside of this in constraining us in terms of having multiple unauthentic identities. So the metaverse today offers various opportunities for us to extend our current identities, reinforce it, possibly reprogram our identities in an alternative universe. And we can kind of have this advantage of being in a God mode. And when I say this, I mean being omnipresent everywhere in the metaverse across time and space. Theoretically, we can actually become anything, reinforcing our desired genders as we see happening today, or perhaps overcoming challenges related to social class, race, or national stigma. However, aside this enablement, it probably may constrain us because we probably may end up having multiple unauthentic and vulnerable identities, and a possible identity crisis between our current worlds and the world promised by the metaverse hype.
I agree, couldn't agree more. It's kind of interesting. I spoke to somebody creating the World of Warcraft, you know, the game, and a lot of male players actually took the role of a female player just because they had advantages for you doing that. Not saying there's any risk sort of connected to that, but it sort of shows that we are prone to be something else that we are online just because, or offline, just because we have advantage of it.
And as a final paradox that we thought we should highlight on, we see a paradox between the metaverse first enhancing our well-being, but also on the downside, degrading our well-being through longitudinal use of immersive gears. So this probably is very nostalgic. Growing up, we probably heard our parents say, do not sit close to the TV or the screens. These are really bad for your eyes. And many years later, this is probably changing. We probably haven't been so close to the screens, but we probably have begun extending these screens as part of ourselves, as the metaverse actually promises. So experiences in the metaverse would, of course, enhance our positive emotions, create feelings of surprises, fun, happiness. It will help us engage better, improve access to healthcare services, and satisfaction in various aspects of life, which would enhance our well-being. But if we think of the metaverse as we see it currently as having these bulky VR gears, which some tell me they do not want to see themselves, they don't see themselves actually wearing these all day, then the long-term effects of well-being of the metaverse may actually be reversed by the long-term effects of these immersive gears on our mental, physical, and social well-being. And currently, there are actually studies around this showing that a longitudinal use of these VR gears could actually have a potential effect on our health and our well-being. And of course, there are also some mixed results on this, which points to the fact that the metaverse as something that may ensure our well-being, but also constrain our well-being, is something that we should really be looking into.
Yeah. I mean, we may become sort of seekers of sort of highly sort of highly immersed, hit-seeking experiences. Something needs to happen all the time, but what is that doing to our cognition, sort of long term? We have no idea.
Okay, so now that we have actually exhausted the paradoxes that we wanted to emphasize on, probably it's also a good time to have some critical reflections on some questions that we think are both interesting to ask around the metaverse.
Yeah, we did talk about sort of the ownership of data. Who owns owns our lives? And the answer should probably be ourselves, should be us. But somehow we are thinking maybe there needs to be more policy makers involved in this issue, and maybe they should be, maybe they are, but maybe they should be more aware of where things potentially are going. So you have initiatives already where there are companies saying that we as private persons should own the data. We should sort of sell our data if we want to, but it should be open, sort of what is going on with us, and maybe we need more policy around that.
And you just talked about the issue of making sure that everyone is included in this potential revolution. I think inclusion has always been a very important part of us with society, even though we have current challenges in doing that. And so it's important for us to be able to find answers to how to make this potential technology or this technology actually available and more inclusive to us.
Yeah, and that's globally. It's not only sort of in the more sort of richer part of the world that should have access to this. So how do you truly make this inclusive? Not only sort of to older, younger people with less means, but sort of from a global perspective. I mean, think about education. If we can make the best education available to anyone, I mean, how good wouldn't that be for the society?
Yeah. And speaking of society as well, we think this question around how do we manage the power of information is very important. Of course, we do have freedoms as we see on platforms today, even though censored in some way. And we think that the metaverse could actually be a much more better platform for us to actually have a louder, heightened voice. However, the question remains, should everyone actually say what they really want to and exercise their kind of freedom to speech, or should this actually be restricted in some way to make the metaverse help us become better off?
I mean, today we do have a problem with fake news. There's no way around that. So how do we actually know what information is relevant or even true? So I think this is a highly critical question because we believe in what we read and see. So the power issue is quite important.
Yeah. And speaking of importance, I think this phenomenon of also fluid identities that people could actually possibly theoretically be whatever that they want to be in the metaverse, or possibly translate or extend themselves into the metaverse is very interesting. And the question here is, can we and should we be whatever that we want to be in the metaverse? Or should we probably not be whatever that we want to be in the metaverse, but it should be controlled in some way? And also, if we can be whatever that we want to be in the metaverse, that is having fluid identities, what new challenges would coping with such fluid identities in multiple social worlds present to us? And with the last question, I think we would have some agreement on this. I mean, we have actually experienced physical worlds, we have experienced digital worlds, and to a large extent, we have also experienced digital worlds or augmented experiences. So should second lives, or should we having second lives through the metaverse be something that we really want? And how do we ensure that this platform or this alternative universe actually ensures our well-being?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to the value aspect and what enhances well-being, and should we not encourage people to live in the real world a bit more compared to a sort of not fake but a virtual or invented world? and maybe, as you pointed out before, maybe there should be multiple worlds where people can have fake identities, but they have real identities in other worlds. I don't know, but sort of this is a highly relevant thought point. Sort of, do we really want to go down this path, and how much do we actually want it?
Especially given some of the paradoxes that we've just pointed out.
Yeah.
So I think we have actually shared some insights that we wanted to share around the promising aspects of the metaverse, value co-creation. And we have also attempted to highlight the dark sides of the metaverse through thinking around it along paradoxes.
Yeah, it's more paradoxes, because we know that there is a potential future that potentially could be good. And we are told, I haven't sort of experienced everything, but we have been informed that anything you can do offline, you can do online in Metaverse. And the question really boils down to, do we want that? Do we want to do everything offline?
Yep. So thank you very much for the audience. Vinod?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for such a wonderful session. And really, it was very interesting to know about, you covered it from value co-creation to destruction. So entirely, two different facets, and I would say oxymorons. So interesting talk how human needs can be served while minimizing the impact of this hedonic consumption. And moreover, we also need to assess the risk of privacy in destruction of value creation in the metaverse. So it was really very interesting.
Wouldn't it be amazing if you can go to India and have a sort of near real life experience of India without really having the carbon footprint of it? I mean, that would be fantastic.
That's really very amazing. So with the permission, I would like to invite now Dr. Anabel for taking a few questions from the whole audience.
Thank you very much, everyone. Professor Anders and Jared, very nice presentation. I really like the paradox perspective that you gave us around all these issues. And I have some questions, but I'm going to prioritize our attendance questions. And the first one is around, should we really invest in the metaverse? Is the best thing to do now?
I think that is happening regardless of what we think of it. But as we started off, it potentially can solve some of the issues that are sort of burning in terms of the healthcare crisis. At least our healthcare systems are sort of imploding. We don't have enough staff. People are sort of very sick and live longer and all that. How do we actually deal with that? And maybe potentially if Metaverse can potentially be a solution to part of it. I don't think it's going to be sort of the solution for everything, but part of it.
Absolutely.
I mean, if doctors can do using holograms, do home visits and inspect patients, I think that would help. And what about all the sort of, as I said, carbon footprint? If we don't have everyone flying into Venice and polluting just not only air travel, but also making the congestion much more difficult for Venice, just to say one city, wouldn't that sort of help as well? So there are potential values, both sort of price quality wise, or also well-being wise, that potentially it could be worth the investment.
Yes, absolutely. And as you said, one of the things is that actually huge investments that are happening now are the things that are driving all these conversations in different sectors, including banking, retail, etc. So yes, I agree with you. The huge investment in this area is what is also motivating these debates. So one of the aspects that you were emphasizing in your presentation is the aspect of the well-being. And we have another question from stating about can Metaverse lead to degrading well-being due to the cyberbullying and hidden identities?
Definitely, I think there is a potential here. Like we said, we do expect that in as much as the metaverse actually presents a platform where we could have an amplified voice, we should be able to find a way to go around its challenges. For example, dominance by others, cyberbullying, fake identities around others. So definitely there is an element of well-being, looking at the potential of the metaverse in terms of its immersion, sociality, giving us new resources, new tools to make us better off. However, the downsides of this in influencing our well-being, I think, are always inevitable. And this is something that we think more research should actually focus on.
Yeah. I mean, just to add to that, we want to highlight the well-being aspects. We want that to be in focus because we think that's sort of that's the human side of things. Do I personally believe that the metaverse will be driven from a well-being perspective? No, probably not, because you have private companies involved here and they want to make money. But again, if I can sort of highlight something, if I can sort of try to bring an important aspect of, I think it's the well-being aspect we should focus on.
Yeah, and I agree with you. We need to be optimistic and, more importantly, proactive into give everybody these options of thinking about the future and how this is connected with our well-being. One aspect around the well-being that we have witnesses is the effect of social media. And before, we didn't consider that when these platforms were emerging, and now we have the big problem. So I think this is a huge opportunity for everyone, industry, government, and academia, to actually start developing this awareness and education that is needed in order to better understand the impact of the technology before it gets too badly into the dark side. So yeah, I'm very optimistic that we can start looking into that. And going to that, there is another question about this aspect about multiple identities, because we have seen in social media that people are more brave when they are talking in online environments, online platforms, that when you are face-to-face with somebody. So this potentially another area in which not only from cyberbullying, but also about individual identities, who I am, how people are identifying themselves. So do you have any specific suggestions or research agendas towards this area of identity?
Well, I think this is a very fascinating area, especially given that we have, I mean, you look at the platforms that we have today and compare it to the metaverse, we have the potential to be whatever that we want to be. But I think a very important research question here is the question of ethics. Should we be what we really want to be, or whatever that we want to be in the metaverse? And what challenges or what new challenges do these multiple identities actually present to us today? And I think understanding the impact of these multiple identities on what we may get from the metaverse could probably help us understand the role of these fluid identities better.
I mean, there's something to say about social control too. Yes, people are more brave, but I don't know if you have seen, I mean, I guess you must have seen the trolled armies that are out there on social media. So that's what I see is the downside of not having this social control and not knowing who's behind these messages. So it's sort of, it may well be that these troll armies are increasing in power if we sort of give them new tools. So it's sort of, and that's connected to identity.
Exactly. So we have another interesting question here around why do you refer to value creation and co-creation and just value destruction, no value co-destruction? That's an interesting perspective of the paradoxes.
I think that is definitely interesting. That is a definitely interesting perspective. And of course, there is also a potential. I mean, if we look at privacy, there is also a potential for value destruction when consumers do not give up their data because they think their privacy may be compromised. In a way, they destroy value. And if firms also create services that rely on consumers' data, and these services are more or less not utilized, in a way, it also destroys value that has been created. So we definitely can look at value destruction from, I mean, a co perspective. And I think that is a very interesting perspective to also look at value destruction.
Yeah, thank you for that. No, I haven't thought about that so much.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, I think that will be added to your paradox comparison. That is an interesting one. So we have many questions. So let me just go to the next one, in which we have Professor Lawrence Brook from University of Sheffield, and he's thanking you for raising these issues, and also maybe Lawrence, you can come and tell about a little bit more about these human rights that you are commenting here.
I think, they're on mute.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Yeah. The question is, how do we protect human rights in global extended metaverse?
That is big in itself.
Yes.
But you can sort of see that I do believe in human rights, but it's sort of it's an area that I don't want to go into too much because it's not really what I do research on. But human rights, sort of how do we actually do this to support humans, not just to support companies, and that then you could connect this to human rights as well. I mean, inclusion is certainly something that is high on the list for me, at least in terms of human rights. So I'm sorry, I'm not a good person to really answer to the human right aspects, but you can clearly see that I'm sort of on the human side when I talk about well-being and not giving too much power to companies or even governments for that matter.
Yes, and actually, I think in your comparison on democracy and power, that is one area where the human rights have to be considered, and the concept of privacy has evolved a lot, and we need to start rethinking how we are valuing this privacy that is part of actually the human rights. That there are so many debates at the moment with the use of technology and excessive collection of data.
Yeah,
but thank you very much.
How do we take that back? I mean, how do we take the power back to sort of own our data? And the other problem, I mean, people are used to giving out data, but they shouldn't, because they should be scared of regarding how much information you actually give out. That's my perspective.
Exactly. And actually, we have a comment here from Professor Maitland from University of Technology, Jamaica, that he thinks that we need to start with educating public regarding the pros and cons of this platform. So, well, it's like all digital environments. We need a lot of education. And as we were saying, we need to be proactive in order to avoid these issues that you have mentioned before. Any other suggestions in terms of education or in your environment?
I concur that we should sort of teach or tell people, inform people about this. And my other thought of this is I view these things as the rain pretty much. It's very difficult to avoid. They will probably be there. And what we can do is prepare and bring an umbrella or sort of find ways that we can navigate in the problems that may occur. So yes, information, trying to sort of help people. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily a good thing. So how do you actually protect yourself and actually use what you need?
And just to add to what you said, I think this issue about informing or getting people educated about the metaverse is very important. And probably one way to also go around this is to gradually move away or move beyond the metaverse hype towards thinking of the metaverse around different paradoxes and what challenges it actually presents to us in addition to its potential.
Exactly. Very good. And also, I have another question here that is interesting about how we perceive the context of the metaverse and the real world. And we have a question here. I'm going to just read it aloud. Is don't we always live in the virtual world? We see animals and flora and fauna on screens, not touch them. So how is different in the metaverse?
That is a good question. Really, maybe I live a different life. I go out in the forest as fast as I can, or be by the sea, or go on the sea. So, but yeah, it is an interesting perspective. As I said, the downside is actually that we are getting more stupid. Honestly, we are. We're not getting smarter, we're getting more stupid, and there's research on that. And the main problem is that everything is adopted after our own environment. So it's probably just a sort of going in the same direction as we already am. What I would argue is that yes, you see things on the screen, but you still use your hands, you smell stuff, you cook. So it's sort of, and the counter argument against that is, of course, you can do that online too, because there are tools that would help you touch and feel whatever you touch, and help you smell whatever you smell. I don't know how to answer it, but I would encourage everyone to be out more in the real world and stomp those grounds if you can. I don't know.
Yeah. I think that is the big dilemma, isn't it? That we are entering on all these digital environments, and we are de-skilling ourselves. Recently, we've been having this huge buzz around the chat GPT, in which, yes, you can do a lot of things with that, but then you are actually losing some skills as well, while you get used and to the convenience of using those tools. So that is always the dilemma. And regarding your comment that about the nature and the virtual worlds, it's always going to be a paradox again, using your approach in terms of saying, yes, if I want to enjoy all this, it's best to do it in nature. But if we have the problems of the carbon footprint, maybe it will help. So,
and there is also a paradox that you really bring up, but didn't pronounce. I mean, if I talk to the IBM people, they say that we want to help people do these simple tasks automatically, like Chat GPT or sort of decision information, so you can spend your time making the big decisions. So that's their counter argument. It's sort of, it's helping you to solve the big issues rather than just solve the small issues. So there's a paradox right there.
Exactly. No, absolutely. And let me just double check here if we have any other questions. Oh, how would you define the metaverse?
This is a very This is a very fundamental question we should ask ourselves, but of course, it can be very vague and complex. But if you ask me, I would say we should look at the metaverse as as an alternative, multiple seamless world. At least that's what the metaverse hype actually promises us, that we could actually have multiple universes, but very seamlessly. And it could be an alternative platform where we could actually mirror our current physical activities within and even perform this probably much more better.
That is an interesting definition, and actually I encourage everyone to look into the recent contribution you have made in a paper that is marketing metaverse, and in there is an interesting definition as well. So I'm just conscious of the time. We still have time for a few more questions, Dr. Kumar.
We can take one question probably because we have 4 or 5 minutes left with us.
Okay, so the final question, and I think you have addressed this issue, but just to for your final thoughts about the question here is about, do you think the companies are ready to tackle all these paradoxes that you have presented?
No.
Exactly.
No, I don't. I mean, there are a lot of interesting debates going on at the moment. Sort of, what if, do companies actually mean well? Do they actually take the ESG dimensions seriously? And I would encourage you to listen to a New York Times podcast, the Daily, the episode, yesterday's episode, where I actually showed or proved that U.S. government is actually backing off all the ESG promises they have made. So can we trust companies to mean well? No, probably not. Can we think that governments will always mean well? No, I don't think so. So I'm sorry, it's all up to you guys, your own personal self, to sort of navigate this complicated landscape.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate all your answers. It's a fascinating topic, and you have given us a lot of material to think about it. And hopefully all our participants will be happy to reflect on this and contact us to keep collaborating and finding ways to move forward into this area of well-being for all our consumers. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
thank you, Professor. I think Dr. Vinod,
yeah,
you can now possibly conclude. And
yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you very much, and thank you so much, Professor Andres Gustafsson and Mr. Jared Offei Lartey, for taking all the queries from the participants and for such an insightful session. Many thanks to Professor Yogesh Dwivedi and Dr. Laurie Hughes. They were not able to make it today for the seminar, but they passed warm regards to everyone, and Professor Raman for conceiving the idea of this seminar series, and also for creating such a wonderful platform to discuss the contemporary theme on emerging perspective on the metaverse. I would like to thank all our guests who have joined today from all around the globe. Last but not the least, I would like to thank Mr. Rajesh and his team for IT support. But before we leave, I have an important announcement to make. The next seminar is scheduled on 22nd March 2023, which is just a week away, where Professor Dimitrios Bouhalis from Bournemouth University Business School will join us from UK to elaborate on very interesting topic, Metaverse and tourism marketing. So request all to mark the date. The link of the same is also pasted on chat. You can get yourself registered for the same. Looking forward to see you all in the next seminar. Thank you once again, everyone. Have a great time.